Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I know it's day 2, but Cameron Trimble here, founder of Hip Politics and also co-founder of our 501c3 affiliate, Hip Nation, where we're focused on mobilizing the political power of hip-hop. I'm a longtime congressional campaign, White House political operative with a real focus in digital engagement. And that's, I would think, dovetails into exactly the vision behind the Culture and Content House. We understand how many people from around the country, and actually with the entire world watching, will be watching my hometown, my city of birth. But there's going to be plenty of politics going on all throughout the streets and all throughout this week. But there's a lot of policy that needs to be elevated. And there's a lot of voices and folks that need to be platformed and come together and communicate and congregate to be able to push us forward. So the idea here, as the National Urban League, who I've had the pleasure to work for before, and Marc Morial and his wonderful team, as they become the premier digital-focused civil rights organization, I thought it was only only natural that we partner and create a space to elevate policy and important conversations that are going to really affect all of America, but especially marginalized communities and communities of color. So one of the ideas, you call it, this is the Culture and Content House. You'll see photo booths, you'll see tons of cameras, videographers, social media experts. We've got content creators coming in and out. One of our big partners was Onyx Collective, Reasonable Doubt. Their season 2, a Hulu show, and so many others. Onyx Impact, which is a Black-owned disinformation and misinformation leading firm. So many different ideas, and because we really want to make this content. So if you have anybody that comes up and asks you what does democracy mean to you or things of that nature, all of this will be captured for audio, for podcasts, as well as clips given out, because that's how we know how we create. So this was an opportunity to elevate those and not just keep these conversations in the room, because we come to so many different panels and, dang, I heard them say something really good. We need to get this out. So thank you again, Marc. Thank you again to your wonderful team for this partnership for today.
Thank you. Give it up for Cameron and Hip Politics. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we'll be joined by some other panelists. We're going to get started this morning. I am honored to be joined by 2 of our colleagues, our collaborators in the civil rights community. And all 3 of us, and Reverend Sharpton will be here and others will be here, have the privilege of leading historic legacy civil rights organizations that over generations have been on the front lines in working for a better America, the advancement of Black people, and the promotion of democracy and civil rights. So Siobhan Arline Bradley, Reverend Siobhan Arline Bradley, is the president of the National Council of Negro Women. And I'm going to give her an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the history of NCNW, because it's extremely important. Melanie Campbell leads the National Coalition for Black Civic Participation and the Black Women's Roundtable. And the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation was the brainchild, I believe, of Eddie Williams many, many years ago, who felt very strongly that the Black civic and civil rights organizations needed to collaborate around voter registration, voter activation, and civic engagement. So it's important that we understand something that is so critical we take for granted, and that is how generations of leaders in our community and activists in our community and people in our community built these civic institutions because we were closed out of mainstream institutions.
Right.
And why it's so important to understand not only the history, but the animating purpose of why we've got to keep these civic institutions strong in the 21st century. So I'm going to go to Siobhan first and give her an opportunity to, number one, talk a little bit about the history of NCNW, but also a little bit about now. What NCNW's animating purpose is now, certainly for the next 80 days,
Yes.
but beyond. And then Melanie, same question for you. So give my colleagues a big round of applause for being here this morning. Thank you all. Siobhan?
So good morning, everyone. Marc, thank you so much, and thank you to it's the Urban League family for me.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be here with two people that I love very dearly and care for. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO, our first time ever having a president and CEO for the National Council of Negro Women. If you do not know the name Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, I will check your black card at the door.
Amen, amen.
She was, and I just honor her spirit now, is and has been a conscious voice of what she thought black women should be doing. In 1935, in December, in New York City, she gathered about 22 national black women's organizations to talk about socio-political and economic opportunities for women that were of African descent. Fast forward to 2024, we're talking about political, socio, and economic issues for women of African descent. She was ahead of her time. She was someone that led and around the cabinet table of President Roosevelt. And many don't really realize this history. She was one of the mentors of Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who was a 20-something when she met Dr. Bethune. I think people don't really understand that connection. You all heard of Dorothy Height. If you've been around D.C., you know we're the only black-owned building on Pennsylvania Avenue. And the Height building represents who she was. She was the sole woman who stood as a member of the Big Six. And so we continuously have pushed towards empowering, advancing, and advocating for women of African descent. Today, the question today, we have something called a Core Four. Education, economic development, also healthcare, and social justice as our priorities. We now have 353 sections or chapters across the country. 30% of them are on college campuses. We are pushing right now for three major policies. One, equal pay for black women. We are here committed to closing that gap of 66 cents on every one white male dollar. The second thing for us is around healthcare and health equity. One of the things that we've been pushing for is ensuring that black women have full access to healthcare by way of bodily autonomy and choice, reproductive choice and options, regardless of your moral compass. The ability to have constitutional freedom is our right and priority. And the last thing is around education. We have been digging deep on freedom to learn. This campaign is really around advancing Black history as a standard bearer in education curricula across this entire United States. Check on voting rights and the other things, but we are excited about being one of the organizations that has the depth of chapters on college campuses. So we go from ages 9 to 90, and I think we're going to be here for a long time.
Give Siobhan a nice big round of applause, NCNW. And ladies and gentlemen, please greet Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. Thanks, Derek, for joining us this morning. We'll get to you in a minute. Melanie.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How many people stayed out too late last night?
I was at Bible study.
I was like,
Amen.
you got jokes.
5 a.m. Right? 5 a.m. Bible study.
Early.
But thank you, Marc. Marc, you always say it because I mean it. This is my brother from another mother. We've been on the trenches for some decades, back to Operation Big Vote days, right? Being here in this moment is just a blessing. It's just a blessing to be in this history-making, her story-making moment. But my day job, I have two of them, one paycheck, so equal pay.
Good black job.
Is that, good black job. Is the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation has been around since May of 1976. Glad to see, actually, all three of you all organizationally were part of the start of the National Coalition. But it started with Eddie Williams, who is an ancestor now, who was the president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. It was Margaret Bush Wilson, who was then, I believe, chair of the NAACP, and chair of the board of the NAACP, and William, I'm blanking, but AFL-CIO, and Marc, the original three were those three, and then they pulled everybody else in. to a meeting, to a convening, like we always have convenings. They convened. And why did they convene in 1976? Because 11 years after the Voting Rights Act was passed, the voter registration numbers were just really abysmal. We were not grabbing a hold of our political power. As we fast, and so that's the initial mission of the organization. And in the 1980s, under Gracia Hillman, who was the executive director at the time of the National Coalition, the Equal Rights Amendment was working to be passed. But at the white girls' table, they didn't really want to hear from the sisters. So she really started, even people think I founded Black Women's Roundtable. I did not. I just took it to another, right? But the Black Women's Roundtable was started because sisters needed to come around to the table. Dr. Height was a founding board member as well. So that's why I say I'm sitting here with founding organizational leaders who had the vision to start the organization to be a convening table, to work not just with Black organizations, but to work with 80 other organizations to come around the table to just share resources, maximize our impact, and be that umbrella, if you will, to be able to share. We do that now in the 21st century on something called the Unity Campaign. So we've been working since October of last year with our Power to Ballot campaign, and we called it "We Won't Be Erased" as a theme because if you think about what has been happening with the attack on our rights and freedoms, it is and of course democracy, and define it as you will, but the way this government functions for us to be able to not just own our power, but reap from the benefits of our ballot. And so that's a core fundamental reason for the organization's existence today. I mentioned Black Women's Roundtable. Another reason, I used to talk about Black women with a secret sauce to the Black vote. Why was that? Not just because we turn out, but because we bring others with us. We are influences in our families. We are the wives, the partners, the aunties. I'm an auntie, right? We are the mothers and the grandmothers, and that's been historically how we say the secret sauce. Well, the secret is out. We got a vice president about to become. Right. I'm nonpartisan, so y'all can say it. About to become. Yes. And so the secret is out. And then the third, and then in that role, we leverage that. We go on Capitol Hill every year. We put out an agenda every year. We put out research on what Black women want when it comes to that vote and how we leverage that. And so we focus on economic empowerment as a part of our strategic platforms, education, global empowerment, as part of what we focus around. And then lastly, there's no organization that can exist without young people. So we have a third component of our work. It's called Black Youth Vote. And through Black Youth Vote, which is youth-led, is for young people. I'm loving what you're doing here, Marc, with you all are doing here, because that's what it is. Young people know best how to reach young people. And so we have a peer-to-peer model that we use to mobilize and make sure young people are front and center when it comes to our work. More to say in the content of the conversation, but thank you, Marc,
Let's
for
give
bringing us
Melanie a
together.
nice big
Thank
round
you.
of applause. Thank you, Melanie, and let's greet Reverend Al Sharpton, founder and president of the National Action Network, who's just joined us. Give him a hand, Reverend Al Sharpton. Derek, thanks for joining, and you lead the NAACP, which is historic in its dimension as being the first in 1909 legacy civil rights organization to be founded. But I also think that you have been on the forefront of what I call helping Black activists understand precision get out the vote efforts. And when you look at what we face today, not only in a presidential election, but broadly defined, how do you think about the challenges we face to boost Black voter participation? And then maybe you can talk about how you think about the strategies and tactics we should be employing.
Thank you, Marc. And Rev, Mel asked a question, how many was out late last night? I told her you and I were at Bible study, so, right, so we getting there.
At 5 a.m.
That's right. God is good. we are in the midst of several tensions that's converging at the same time. Tension one, they're running out of white people. That creates a level of anxiety in this country that we have not seen in many, many years, and for some of us in our lifetime. Because when you run out of people that you rely on to maintain power, you go to desperate measures, even if it's outside of the norms of what is acceptable culturally or by law. So that's one tension. We see in the January 6th. Second tension, the median age of the African American community is 31 years old. Think about that. The median age is 31 years old. And those individuals who are now the median age grew up in a time where they took civics and social studies out of the classroom. So they have no concept of structures and governance and the guardrails. Thirdly, that same generation grew up during a time where the consumption of information is so democratized, you don't know what to believe anymore. It's no longer the nightly news, it's no longer cable broadcast. Social media platforms are substituting as factual information in the midst of both national and international mis- and disinformation campaigns. On top of that, globally, they're running out of white people. That the tensions you are seeing in different countries, some of which mirror what's taking place here, on top of a continent with 54 countries where the median age is 18 and is 1.2 billion people and growing as Africa. All of those dynamics is converging in the midst of an election cycle that happens November 5th, which would define what it means to be in a free society going forward. And the reality will come full circle whether or not we can turn out the vote here in America. Now, those are some tensions that we need to start paying attention to a little differently, right? If you think about 1964, the Freedom Summer, the challenge in New Jersey, that was a calculated strategy to put on stage the atrocities that was taking place in the South, using Mississippi as the theater in the midst of a global Cold War struggle to capture resources, forcing the president to do something he didn't want to do, had to take Federal Hammer off the camera because he didn't want to broadcast because Russia was using it in those same 54 countries, or actually it was more countries at that time, to get the resources because Russia was saying, look how they treat black folks in America, how they gonna treat you on the continent of Africa. What happens in local communities is a reflection of what's going on globally. What's happening globally is a reflection of what's happening in local communities, and we need to understand that. But it's hard to teach that because we have young people, median age 31, who've never been exposed to social studies, civics, or government classes. And now you have us. So this election becomes even more crucial, and so for the NAACP, Rev and I, we talk, right? We all have a lane. So if they want a profound speaker, they're gonna call Rev and Siobhan. They ain't calling me. I'm good with that, because we all have a role to play. And in that role, we have to make sure that we are outcome focused, not output focused. And outcome focus is, can we increase turnout in the key areas that could add to the road to 270 to protect our interests nationally and protect the interests of the diaspora. That's where we are. And we are best positioned in this country as a part of the African diaspora to lead because we have the intellectual capital, we have the executive training that we fought for, and we are best positioned. And so as we look at the road to 270, where are the priority states, and can we increase black infrequent voter turnout, and in some areas as low as 3%, other areas 9%, and that's what we're working on as NAACP. Because we have to have a broader view, a strategic focus, and be metrically driven. And so our job now is recruiting the volunteers to talk to their neighbors. The most effective way to turn out the vote is neighbor talking to neighbor. Because with that, some of those neighbors live in your household because it's your husband, wife, or kids who registered and voted in 2008 or 2012 because we were inspired. And then we turned the corner on 2016 and they weren't talking to us. The best thing that happened over the last 3.5 weeks is we're seeing the joy, the inspiration, and the hope again because our folks can see the possibility in the candidates that are listed and they can see the threat at the same time. Now that's important because if we're only talking about the threat without the hope of what's possible, it suppresses the energy and you can feel the energy shift.
That's right. That's it. That's it.
But let me tell you, that ain't enough because we live in a bubble. Because when you go outside of our bubble, people still have questions. They're looking for directions. They want information. They want to understand, how do my voice, my vote matter? We're not looking for somebody to do something for us. How do I empower myself to get something done? And that's the job we must do. Because as we talk, we're like, whew, we didn't realize how suppressed the landscape was until the shift happened. Like, wow, this feels better. But let me tell you, it ain't enough. We got 80 days. 76 to be exact. Right?
Say 76.
All right, 76, right? Final point here. We have great talking points of outcomes because of the black vote in 2020. Let's talk about the power of the black vote. Yes, we eliminate student debt, particularly for government workers and teachers, on average of $68,000 wiped away. Clean slate. Why was that important? Because if you talk about closing a racial wealth gap, wealth is created through home ownership and entrepreneurship, and you can't get there if your credit is screwed up because your income debt ratio is off and student loan debt and medical bills knocked it off. We've taken one side of that off, but then interest rates shot up and private equity firms are gobbling up homes, driving up prices, trying to create permanent renters out of too many of us. So that's our next fight. But we can't get to that fight unless we win November 5th, and we can't win November 5th if we're only talking to those of us in the room, particularly if we are not in that medium age of 31, because that's our target generation and population, and that's what's gonna make a difference.
Give it up for Derek Johnson, a great, powerful analysis. Reverend Al, let me set this question up this way. So we have an election where, on the Democratic side, the Democratic Party will nominate for the third time since the year 2000 a diverse ticket. I think it is instructive to learn and to reflect that since 2000, there have been 3 non-diverse Democratic tickets. 2000, Gore, Lieberman. 2004, Kerry, Edwards. 2016, Clinton and Kane.
We lost.
However, in 2008, Obama, Biden. 2012, Obama, Biden. 2020, Biden, Harris. Diverse tickets have carried the day. But here's the question. In 2004, you waged a campaign for president. In 1984 and 88, when we first met, Reverend Jesse waged a campaign for president. I want you to kind of tie together foundationally, in your perspective, how those candidacies, 84, 88, your campaign in 04, was really a precursor to the emergence of the political viability and success of diverse tickets on the Democratic side?
Well, first, let me thank you for convening us. And let me say this. I think that sometimes when we have forums and we talk as a collective about the leaders of legacy organizations, we must always respect the traditions we come from. And as Derek said, we have different lanes. But at the same time, I don't think a lot of our people understand that the time that we function in, I'm talking about those of us on this panel, we could not study anywhere in our past. I grew up in Operation Breadbasket under Jesse Jackson and Reverend William Jones. They never had to deal with a civil rights movement at a time you had a black head of state. So when Obama won, Marc and I have been jealous, and all of us that were in position, Melanie, had to figure out how do you challenge the state when it's a black head of state without undermining him. Well, I couldn't go read Frederick Douglass to figure that out. And I couldn't read Jesse to figure that out, because they all could easily fight the power. Well, the power is you now. Ferguson happens. Michael Brown gets killed by police. Attorney General's coming in. Guys in the street that were rioting that we were telling, no, don't do that, rally with us to get justice. They said, well, man, we can't talk to the man, talking about getting indictments. And I said, we are the man. Eric Holder is the man. So we are having had, one of the reasons why I think it's so good that we work together is we're trying to figure a lot of this out. Maybe historians 50 years from now will say whether we got it right or wrong. And I bring that up because if Kamala is successful, it would be the second time we have a black head of state. How you thread that needle is going to be important on all of what you do. Because there were some blacks that got mad at us. Say, where's Obama's black agenda? Well, Obama had to be the president for everybody, but at the same time, we had to make sure he included us. Well, how do we do that? And the same thing with Kamala. Kamala cannot walk out there on Thursday night and throw a fist up and say, you know, free the land. She'd be the president of the whole land. So we need to see what we are dealing with in the historic position that we're in. And I think that a lot of us don't understand that. Secondly, I think that as Derek said, you got to understand the demographics and the landscape is different. If you've got the median age, which is correct, is 31, a lot of what we talking about, these kids wasn't even born. I got kids, God did a documentary on me a couple of years ago that's out now, getting ready to get an Emmy, John Legend. A lot of those kids never knew the controversy. Talk about, you ain't that controversial no more. They say, well, when was he controversial? Well, a lot of the cases I fought was 30 years ago. Well, if you 31, you don't know nothing about that. You know about Trayvon, you know about George Floyd, but you don't know about Howard Beach. And we talking to people that wasn't even born, less known, educated. And I think that we've got to realize, people talk about, well, you don't understand what they did to us. No, they don't understand. Because they weren't born then and we don't educate them. And with people like DeSantis taking black studies out of school, they will have no way of knowing. Just like we did not know firsthand what slavery was like. And many of us from the North didn't know what segregation was like. When my mother talked to me about backing the bus, I didn't know nothing. We always could ride the front of the bus. But we lived with gentrification, which is still going on. So a lot of what we need to address is how we address right now. And I think that saying all of that fits into how we set up the infrastructures that can bring our people out to vote. It is a door-by-door process. It is neighbors. It is, there was a time we could just rally in churches. Well, the church denominations are not what they were. National Baptist Convention is not what it was. National Progressive Convention is not what it was. But you have churches now that are not denominational that are stronger, drawing thousands of people. So you still have a church base, you just got to know what church it is. You still have a base of student activists, but you got to know how to tap into that, and you have to talk their language. And I think that what we do as a collective is try to, in many ways, address different sides of the same situation in the climate of times have changed. So you got some young blacks that are into dealing with, as we all are, concerned about Gaza, that have not joined what's going on the west side of Chicago. And I was talking to some youngsters the other day. I preach in church here. If you are concerned about Gaza, you also should be concerned about the west side.
In Haiti.
You ought to be concerned about Haiti. You ought to be concerned about Sudan.
Sudan.
But how do we put that on the agenda and keep it there? And I think that that is the challenge we have as a people collectively, and to be humble enough to say we have to learn as we go.
Absolutely.
So last night when we walked Reverend Jackson out to honor him, the Jackson 88 move is a different climate today, yet it's set up where we are today. So going to direct to Marc's question is that what we did in 84 and 88 and I did in Carol Mosley Brown in 04 is impact the party that helped what happened in 08 and 12 and on. What do I mean by that? In 88, Reverend Jackson led the movement to change the rules of the Democratic Party. Before Jackson, it was winner take all. Jesse changed the rules saying we must have proportional voting, meaning winner take all was if you ran in a state and won the state by one vote, you got all the delegates. Proportional means if you ran in a state and lost by one vote, you still get all the delegates of all but the one. If the rules had stayed the way they were before 88, Hillary Clinton would have been the nominee. She won New York, Ohio, she won all the big states. Barack Obama won by proportionally getting enough in the big states and combine it with the states that he did not have the big numbers in. Our race in 04 was to keep the rules, and they change the rules every 4 years at convention time. So one of the things we wanted to do was keep Jesse's rules and to keep the people on the rules committee that helped to fight to keep those rules. Bring it right now to where we are now. When Joe Biden had decided he was not going to run, I remember it was a Sunday, 4 weeks ago. I was on my way to speak at a church. We was honoring Ed Towns, who's reaching 90 years old, Hakeem Jeffries, Greg Meeks and I. We got the call 20 minutes, Biden's pulling out. First question I asked is, I said, well, is he going to endorse Harris? Called Jim Clyburn, he said he's going to endorse in 20 minutes. 30 minutes after that, they were calling for an open convention. The only reason you didn't have an open convention and that Kamala became the presumptive nominee is Leah Daughtry put on the Rules Committee through the Jackson movement, reaffirmed by all of us, blocked it saying the rules say, Joe Manchin, you can't run. Had we not done the institutional work, 88, 84, 04, and Derek is right, started 64 with Fannie Lou Hamer. There's a direct line from 64 to 84 to 88 to 04. Because we create, my pastor, Reverend William Jones, told me, he said something that's very important, direct to your question, Mark. He said, Al, you run around a lot now. I'd gotten older and was doing stuff nationally. He said, you ever flew a 747? I said, yeah. He said, have you ever flown the 707? I said, yeah. He said, have you ever flown a Learjet? I said, I've been a Learjet. He said, have you ever flown in a plane that didn't need an airport to land? I said, no. He said, it doesn't matter how big the plane is. It matters whether you have an airport that can handle it landing. Otherwise, you have a crash. We had to build the infrastructure to launch the campaigns of Barack Obama and Kamala Harris. If the infrastructure wasn't there, their candidacies wouldn't have landed. And that's what we must do. We must deal with the candidacy and the infrastructure at the same time. Otherwise, you have symbol and no substance, and it will not work, which is why when we all collaborate, we play on each other's strengths, because that's an infrastructure, because all of us are trying to figure this out as we go along. So we all have different ways we do things, all have different talents. Derek talk about if somebody need to speak or call me a shot, but I call him to find out what I'm gonna say. Just because you got the talent. I know, I used to be close to James Brown. Everybody that knows how to sing don't mean they have a song. You don't have a good song, I don't care how good you can sing. All of us must understand that we're not looking for messiahs. We're looking for infrastructures that will work.
Right.
If we end up with just a messiah movement, you're going to end up just with a mess, the first part of that. And we've been down that road. So I think that where we are is based on the work from 64, really 54, Brown versus Board of Education, all the way to 64, all the way on. It is based on that this is where we are. But the question is, what are they going to say about us in 2054? Did we blow it? Were we the ones that did not continue to progress, or were we the ones that built on the blocks that was already laid?
Let's give it up for Reverend Al Sharpton. Rev, you precisely did what I hope you would do, which is to tie the present into the past. Because for Barack Obama, he need not run a symbolic campaign. And when he ran, there was no question that a black person could run for president, compete, and win primaries. And I'm glad that you talked about the restructuring of the primary process over those years, which has given rise to what we're able to do today. So let's give all our panelists thus far a round of applause. Dave Johnson. Let me go before we to Damon Hewitt. Damon leads the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, brilliant civil rights lawyer. Damon, we've all talked a bit about history of our institutions and what gave birth to the institution and how that manifests itself today. So if you take a minute and maybe help everyone understand the Lawyers Committee's both genesis and current purpose.
For sure. Greetings, Marc. Greetings, colleagues. Let's just give a hand for this political brilliance, the strategic brilliance of my colleagues from the legacy organizations. Like Marc, I come from New Orleans, and it's a gumbo of culture, of people, of politics. I'm an alum of Louisiana State University, which brought us Shaquille O'Neal, Donna Brazile, but also David Duke, the former Grand Wizard. Yeah, Sha'Carri. But also David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK. That's the kind of, the toxicity of the gumbo, right? And so you can't grow up in that kind of environment. My parents are proud graduates of Southern, to complicate my life, university, right? You can't grow up in that kind of environment without having some sense of innate political sensibility. And that sensibility, I realized, wasn't just about the experience I had on campus, with kids wearing blackface and minority scholarship money going to white fraternity kids that we had to stop. My sensibility came from the generations. It came from Marc and his family. It came from so many others. And I mentioned Marc and his family because when the Lawyers Committee was founded, Marc, your father was instrumental to that. See, it was 1963, the summer of 63, June. Within a few days span, a few horrible and then amazing things happened. On the horrible side, Governor George Wallace in Alabama stood in the schoolhouse door to block Vivian Malone and James Hood from integrating the University of Alabama, defying federal mandates. And then President Kennedy delivered the first ever televised address by a sitting president calling for comprehensive civil rights legislation that would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964 after his death. But then in the wee hours of the following morning, in Derek's adopted home in Mississippi, Medgar Evers was assassinated in the driveway of his own home. That led then President JFK, John F. Kennedy, to say, where are the lawyers? What are they doing? You had activists in the streets, you had people putting their lives and liberty on the line, but where were the lawyers? So he sent out a telegram to the leading lawyers from the nation's private bar, law firms and whatnot. In that room were 244 lawyers. There were 40 black lawyers. That is notable for 1963, including Ernest Dutch Morial, Marc's father. You see, he put something on the line because after Medgar was assassinated, everybody wasn't just saying, oh, poor Medgar. They were saying, poor Medgar, poor Murley, poor us. But also, Dutch Morial was the head of the NAACP in New Orleans. So he was on a danger alert too. But he still traveled to this meeting that President Kennedy convened. That meeting of 244 lawyers gave birth to the Lawyers Committee. Long story short, the Lawyers Committee is a peaceful army of private attorneys general. We mobilize the nation's private bar and our own lawyers and work actively with community to defend our civil rights and to advance racial justice. In the 2020 election cycle, we mobilized 14,000 lawyers from all across the country to answer calls from voters on the election protection hotline. And when we got calls in that needed action, we took action. We even filed lawsuits, including with Melanie Campbell standing up as a plaintiff for our organization in a horrible case we'll talk about in the next panel. So we are in league with these leaders. We take inspiration and guidance from them. You are my political mentors, you too, Siobhan, whether you know it or not. And we are aligned. We are aligned. As I heard someone invoke Clyburn earlier, as he likes to say, we have unity. It doesn't always mean uniformity. That's right.
Yes.
We have unity.
Yes.
And that means alignment. So heed this political advice, work with us, stand with us, and together we cannot be defeated.
Good. Let's give it up for David Hewitt. And I know several of our panelists are going to have to leave, but before doing so, let me recognize Tona Boyd, who is the number 2 person at the at the Legal Defense Fund, brilliant civil rights lawyer, and Lauren Douglas, who's grandsire Archon, which means the big man at Sigma Pi Phi, the Boule. Thank you all for being here with us. I want to go to a real quick question and get a quick answer. So one of the things we all think about, and we've talked about, is the next step. Yep. So we are going to work hard to turn this vote out, but we also have to think about the policy and the agenda for Black America and for civil rights going forward. In May of 2020, we convinced, I think, and we sought to convince both parties to do this, but the Biden campaign engaged with us about creating, quote unquote, a Black agenda. It was called Lift Every Voice. And that agenda became a guiding force for the policy measures that the administration undertook after it was seated in January 2021. Today, as we think about going forward, and I'm going to start with you, Melanie, then I'll go to Derek and Rev, come back to Siobhan and Damon. Very quickly, I'm going to ask you for 1 or 2 items that you want to see squarely on the 100-day plan and the 6-month plan that forms what this is about. We don't push for turnout for the sake of turnout. We push for turnout because we want to put policymakers in power who are going to embrace the changes we need for our community. So Mel, very quickly, I'm going to hold you to, as much as possible, 1, maybe 2 things.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Well, voting rights. Everything we do, one of the ways that we have not been able to fully maximize our power is because of the attack on our voting rights. That even to this day, was the other day we were together, Derek, that even anybody from Georgia, but they just won't stop, right? So now, here comes one more thing they're trying to do in Georgia. So we can't hold on to the policies. We know that now because of the Supreme Court. Two, can I have three? Reform of the Supreme Court, right? Really changing how that court is set up. But how do we do that? It's what Derek's talking about. Okay, we can talk about the president all day long, but she's not going to be able to do anything if she doesn't have a House or a Senate. You heard the president say that last night? That is not hyperbole. She won't get anything done if she doesn't have the House or the Senate. So deem and understand that whatever state you're in, there is a congressional race going on. There is a Senate race going on, and there are places now because of the enthusiasm we have the opportunity. But if we're not strategic, we'll lose that opportunity, right? Marc, I'll stop there. There's other things because I think we talked a little bit about other rights and freedoms, but fundamentally we need to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed, Freedom to Vote Act passed, and then for Black women. We know that the economic issues around being able to deal with the cost of living is high. We did a Black Roundtable Essence poll earlier this year, and it became the #1 issue. Issues around bread and butter are real. How can my check make it through the month? And that's not happening. So I'll stop there. And
Let's give it up for Melanie Campbell. Thank you very much.
So,
Melanie has to
yes.
excuse herself
Yes.
for her own event. So thank you for joining us this morning.
And I want to say, we're going to be back together in a little while because we're going to party, we're going to do all these things. We're going to be hosting this unity gathering. So coming over to the Marriott Marquis is open because we're going to be talking about what we need to do, share with each other, us as a core, but other Black organizations, Black-led organizations, Black leaders, we have to come together. That comes at 11 o'clock, so I do apologize. I have to run.
Thank you. Give it up for Melanie Campbell. Let's go to Derek Johnson. Derek, on the forward-leaning agenda. And before doing so, I see the Attorney General of the great state of New York, Leticia James, with us. Raise your hand, Madam Attorney General. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your advocacy. Let's give it up for the Attorney General one more time. Thank you very much. Derek, go ahead.
I think Mel hit it on the head. We have to have a comprehensive reform around voting rights, freedom to vote, John R. Lewis, but also take a serious look at the Electoral College. There should be a whole package of reform. Second, I think she's right also, not only Supreme Court, but just the federal judiciary to look at that whole structure, because what they've done over the last several cycles is embed ultra-conservative, Federalist Society trained judges to undermine and subvert rights and democracy. So we have to do that. Forward-looking also is making sure we're capitalizing on what we've already done. Speedy's announcement was about the $16 billion to go to HBCUs. Yes, it's true and not true at the same time because the HBCUs ain't seen $16 billion. They didn't have the infrastructure to apply and absorb it. So there's $16 billion out there potential, but they have not drawn it down. Even when you look at Justice 40 in general, I've seen one community really grab a lot of money out of the Department of Transportation because most of the other communities didn't do it. That was in Portland, Oregon. What they did in terms of when they split up that Black community, Black folks had an infrastructure in place to absorb $450 million to do an overpass to reunite that Black community. We can advocate for policy changes, but if we don't have infrastructure on the ground to absorb the money, other folks gonna take it or it's gonna go to waste. Every poverty program almost have been the catalyst for other people's wealth on our demographics. Think about that, empowerment zone, enterprise communities, goes on, even the Katrina Bond stuff, everybody else positioned themselves, they grabbed the money, and so Brooklyn ain't Brooklyn no more, Harlem ain't Harlem no more, and Detroit don't look nothing like where I grew up because white folks come and took the money and they redeveloped in our community. We can't afford to move there, and we got built out of those properties. So a priority must be, how do we advocate for policy and prepare the infrastructure to absorb the resources to empower our communities.
Thank you. Give it up for Derek Johnson. I want to acknowledge two leaders who joined us. Congressman Andre Carson from Indianapolis. Welcome. Give it up. And our longtime representative in Congress, former congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Louisiana, former advisor to President Biden and an advisor on the campaign, Cedric Richmond. Give it up, Cedric. Thank you indeed for being here.
Marc, and Cedric was the pastor of the Bible study last night, so if anybody was out late, Cedric was holding court.
Cedric, they said the Bible study started at 5.
That's right.
Yeah. Reverend Al.
No, I think I certainly agree with my two colleagues that have already spoke. Voting rights bill is a priority because if they cannot, as stated, reverse the population, they can now just try to reduce how we are able to vote. And we have to be vigilant about that. One of the reasons that they talk a lot about how Donald Trump is losing it. He's losing it not only because he's just losing it. And those of us that have known him a long time know he was not that much to lose. But is that it is blacks that are bringing him down. Don't ever forget, it's a black woman prosecutor in Georgia, black man in New York County, black woman judge in Washington, and a black woman that got all his money standing in the back of the room. So he is absolute, as one who was found to be discriminatory against black, for all these black women to jack him up, as the kids say, is just driving him crazy. But we did that by having the strength to vote, which means they know they can undo it. So you can't vote for Fannie Willis or a Tish James or our district attorney Alvin Bragg. So we must protect the vote and expand on that. Secondly, I agree about the economic infrastructure. We cannot afford the freedom that we seek if we don't have economic equality. One of the things that we do in National Action Network, which is why we never take government money. I never ask for city, state, or federal money, because we have to have the freedom to operate. When Sean Bell's family called me all the way to George Floyd, we could pay for the funeral and do all the things because we're not following the guidelines of government. If we did, we'd be violating government. But when George Floyd's family called, they did not, I can't tell you the amount of funerals that we paid for in the last 10 years because most families don't prepare for a family member to die. And then you get, you know how we can be. We're gonna have a funeral now, we're gonna have 3 limousines. You ain't never had a Chevrolet, but now I got to pay for 3 and all of that. But if you are government, if we dealt with economic empowerment, we can finance our own movements. We've got union in New York I'm dealing with right now. 78% of their membership is black and Latino. I asked them, well, who invests your money? 0. They have a board that decides on pension funds. That's all white. How do you have 78% black and Latino members that are the pensioners, but the board is white? So in many respects, they are feeding the money to developers that are building in our communities out of our pension funds, which means grandma is financing her own removal with gentrification. So those are the immediate things we got to deal with, is how we deal with the political infrastructure, voting rights law, to continue what we talked about from what Jesse was doing to what we did in 04 until now. But we must have the economic infrastructure where that we are spending more and involved in more money than is directly coming back to us. But we have to have free agents to negotiate that so they can't cut off our advocacy.
Give it up for Reverend Al. We only have a few more minutes. We'll go to Siobhan, and then I'm going to quickly wrap. Give you, Damon, a chance to give us one idea. Go ahead, Siobhan.
So first and foremost, the Supreme Court reforms are really a priority for us because the decision on affirmative action and the decision on Roe has really reframed the way that we look at constitutional freedoms now. And so NCNW is committing to actually push this current presidency to go ahead and activate some executive orders on his own. And there's also, in terms of our states' rights work, to put things like Roe in a state's hands allowed us to find out we have some wins on the ground that we can actually see. Kansas was a big win, right? States that we thought would never come through for women's rights have come through. That's first. Second, around Black history in schools, I don't want us to miss why Black history is everything. There were 619 pieces of legislation and ordinances that were passed on a local level to remove Black history from schools. I want you to understand what that means. 619 communities across the country decided that Black history was too dangerous to be taught. What that means is there's been a long-term, excessive, intentional plan to allow white mothers to come in and take over school boards and then remove that history so that Black children cannot understand their worth. What does that do? That changes the way they do civic engagement. That changes the way they understand who they are as a people. That changes their economics. We are saying that Black mothers are going to go back and take over Black schools, and Black school boards are going to show up. The last thing I want to offer is around the economic piece. We have already called on the administration to do this, which was we want a full study on the impacts on Black women by making 34 cents less than every white man in this country. We are asking for that. We're going to push for that, and we're going to finalize it with our 8-state strategy. Every high school senior in this country needs to be registered to vote automatically.
Give it up for Siobhan. Damon, real quick.
Co-sign it all. I'll close on this, though. Rev, I ran into felonies this morning, and I was reminded that after George Floyd was murdered, Breonna Taylor, so many others, over the last several years, 10 years since Michael Brown, thank you, was killed in Ferguson, not a single federal law has changed. Not a single federal law has changed. We need the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. In its strongest form, that's got to be top of agenda too.
Give it up for Damon. We're going to be transitioning to the next panel headed and led by Karen Freeman Wilson. And I want to give Attorney General James a chance to come up and say a quick word in a minute. But
she ought to be speaking at the convention.
Amen on that.
Well,
I want to point your attention to this document, which is the National Urban League's D3 agenda. So our D3 agenda revolves around 3 calls to action: defend democracy, demand diversity, and defeat poverty. And on this is a list of go-forward agenda items that we all need to be familiar with. And I would ask that in your individual capacities, in your organizational capacities, you embrace. One reason why we were able to push the Biden administration to do things early and continue to do things with a substantial amount of unfinished business is because we were serious about policy, number one. But number two, he had a House and a Senate that was aligned. Without an aligned House and Senate, I think several colleagues said this, we have no shot to get George Floyd, the Justice and Policing Bill, John Lewis, freedom to vote, reproductive rights. We have no ability to get any of that done. Second, on the infrastructure, there are some structural things that we're going to have to deal with. One of the impediments on the transportation dollar side is when money, particularly in red states, goes to the states, goes to regional planning organizations that are not sensitive to the principles of equity, not supportive of Black business participation. That's number one. Number two, there are these caps on net worth and on gross income that limit the ability of Black businesses to grow with federal contracts. They're too big to be small, too small to be big. They get another contract, they're ineligible for the programs. Right. We have to get serious about some specificity around a number of things that get in the way of us actualizing the benefits of the Biden first-term legislative initiatives. So I want everyone to be clear. As a collective, those of us here, the Legal Defense Fund, Leadership Conference. As a collective, we're going to be working certainly between now and the next 84 days. 76. 76, is it now? Let's call it, say 76. 76 days to get this vote out, but we're going to be working hard too to ensure that we have a collective agenda. But let me say this. We're going to have this agenda, but we're not going to put the agenda on Front Street today. We're not going to put it on Front Street today. Part of being smart and strategic means the timing of what and when you do things.
That's exactly right.
So we need to be clear that when people may not, quote, hear all of these things, it's not because we sleeping, it's because we're being smart and strategic and thoughtful, Rev and Derek, about what we do. So let's give it up for the members of the panel, Al Sharpton, Derek Johnson. We're going to take a photo, but before you, no, keep your seat, Attorney General James.
Right.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here this morning. I welcome all of you, and I will be very brief. Before Donald Trump, most people had no idea what an attorney general does. There are now 6 African-American attorney generals. Aaron Ford from Nevada, Kwame Raoul from Illinois, Keith Ellison from Minnesota, Anthony Brown from Maryland, and my good friend Andrea Campbell from Massachusetts, and myself. And an African-American just won the primary in the state of Washington, who we are supporting. It's important that all of you understand that before Project 2025 came out, in 2016, when he was the president, it was attorney generals who stood up. I've sued Donald Trump over 100 times. Attorney generals in general have sued him over 200 times. I won my case almost 80% of the time. Project 2025, back in 2016 was Project 2025 without it being put in writing. We now have it in writing. I'm not new to Project 2025. We were there before, we won our case, and we are prepared to do it again. Attorney generals led by, again, the 6 African-American attorney generals are stepping up. We are organizing. We are already strategizing. We have a meeting on Tuesday in Washington, D.C., where we are putting forth our briefs, our legal arguments, and all of the issues that are contained in Project 2025. We will beat them again, but hopefully we won't have to do it because the power lies in all of your hands. Let's get out the vote and let's stand up and let's defend democracy and elect Madam President Kamala Harris.
Attorney General James. Okay, we're going to take a shot. All right.
Want to say thank you, everybody, again. Before you leave out, we have in the next room the future of diversity, equity, inclusion with some great leaders, Andre Carson, and thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for doing this.